Welcome to Hollywood, latest reports. There are moments in Christian broadcasting that transcend performance. Moments when music turns into ministry and a song becomes a spiritual cry that reaches across nations. On a calm evening, inside the familiar setting of Sun Life Broadcasting Network SBN, one such moment unfolded. Viewers tuned in expecting another soul-stirring service. But what they received was a performance so moving that it would be remembered as Joseph Larason's most emotional performance ever broadcast on SBN. The cameras were rolling, the choir was ready, and the audience had filled their seats inside Family Worship Center. For those who regularly followed SBN, Joseph Larason was not an unfamiliar face. Known for his soft-spoken humility and gifted voice, Joseph had often been praised as one of the network's most promising young musicians. But on this night, he was different. There was a visible weight in his posture, a fire in his eyes, and a trembling passion in his voice that hinted at something much deeper than just a song. As the music began, people sensed immediately that this was no ordinary performance. Joseph was not just singing, he was pouring out his heart. Every note carried both strength and brokenness. Every word seemed to come from a place of pain transformed into faith. By the end of the song, many in the audience were in tears, while those watching from home flooded social media with messages describing how powerfully they had been touched. It was a night when music became a testimony, and for Joseph Larason, it became the performance that defined his ministry. To understand why this performance was so moving, one must first understand who Joseph Larason is and why his journey matters. Joseph was not born into celebrity status, nor did he pursue fame for its own sake. Instead, his path was one of quiet faithfulness, where each step was guided by conviction rather than ambition. Joseph's connection to Sun Life Broadcasting Network was more than professional, it was spiritual. SBN, founded by the Swaggart family, has long been known for its music ministry, broadcasting gospel music to millions of homes around the world. When Joseph first appeared on SBN, he was a fresh face with a humble spirit, someone whose passion for Christ could be felt as soon as he opened his mouth to sing. Unlike some performers who rely on showmanship, Joseph carried himself with sincerity. His style was marked not by dramatic gestures, but by raw emotion. Viewers quickly recognized that his voice wasn't just technically skilled, it was spiritually anointed. People often described his singing as a prayer in melody. Behind the scenes, Joseph had not lived an easy life. Friends and fellow musicians quietly spoke about personal struggles he had endured, health battles, financial challenges, and moments of deep doubt. Yet each struggle had deepened his faith rather than destroyed it. That authenticity was what set him apart. When Joseph sang, people knew he wasn't performing a role, he was sharing his life, his scars, and his faith. By the time of this particular performance, Joseph Larason had already established himself as a significant voice on SBN. But what happened that night elevated him to something more, a vessel of comfort and conviction for thousands who needed hope. Every unforgettable moment has a build-up, a sense of anticipation that something special is about to unfold. In the days leading to Joseph Larason's performance on Sun Life Broadcasting Network, many insiders at Family Worship Center noticed a difference in his demeanor. Joseph, usually calm and steady, seemed more reflective than usual. He spent extra hours in prayer, rehearsed not with the determination of an entertainer, but with the desperation of a believer who knew his song might change lives. Those closest to him later revealed that Joseph had been wrestling with deeply personal issues. Some spoke of private grief he carried. Others mentioned the burden he felt for the broken world around him. Whatever the details, it was clear he was preparing to deliver more than a musical number. He was preparing a testimony in song. The service itself was already highly anticipated. Special guests had been invited. The sanctuary was filled to capacity, and thousands were tuned in through live broadcast. The choir and orchestra rehearsed with precision, knowing they were supporting one of the most heartfelt performances the ministry would ever host. When Joseph walked onto the stage, silence fell across the room, not because he demanded attention, but because he carried an atmosphere with him. His eyes revealed both humility and intensity. He wasn't walking out as a performer eager for applause. He was stepping out as a messenger with something urgent to deliver. The musicians gave him a nod, and the first notes began to rise. The opening chords filled the sanctuary, echoing with warmth and reverence. Joseph gripped the microphone, his hands trembling slightly. As he began the first verse, his voice carried both strength and fragility. It was clear from the first word that he wasn't just singing to the audience, he was crying with them. The lyrics, simple yet profound, spoke of pain, hope, and redemption. Every syllable seemed soaked in prayer. Many later commented that it felt as though Joseph had walked through the very valleys he was singing about. This wasn't performance, it was testimony set to music. Within minutes you could see tears rolling down faces in the crowd. Some lifted their hands in worship, others buried their heads in their hands. People who had walked into the church carrying heavy burdens suddenly felt the weight of those burdens shifting. What made this moment even more remarkable was Joseph's own emotion. He didn't try to hide it. As he reached the chorus, his voice cracked slightly, not from weakness, but from overwhelming sincerity. It was as though his heart could not contain the depth of feeling. Yet instead of diminishing the performance, it made it more powerful. Cameras captured close-ups of Joseph's face, revealing eyes closed in near desperation, as if he were praying through every lyric. For those watching at home, the screen became more than a broadcast. It became an altar. People reported falling to their knees in living rooms, weeping as Joseph's song became a mirror of their own struggles and faith. The atmosphere inside Family Worship Center was unlike anything many had ever experienced. At first, people tried to remain composed, nodding along with the melody. But as Joseph continued, walls began to break. The sound of sobs could be heard across the sanctuary. Men and women, young and old, pastors and first-time visitors, all were swept into the tide of emotion. Some stood to their feet, raising hands high as tears streamed down their faces. Others clasped the hands of loved ones sitting beside them. Couples embraced, families prayed together. Strangers reached out to comfort one another. The performance had transcended music and had become a shared spiritual moment. One powerful scene unfolded as the camera panned across the audience. An elderly woman, perhaps in her 70s, closed her eyes and whispered along with the lyrics, tears staining her cheeks. Next to her, a young teenager, who appeared restless at first, was now wiping his eyes, visibly moved. Two different generations, united by the same song. On the front rows, fellow singers and musicians who had shared the stage with Joseph countless times were also deeply affected. Many closed their eyes in prayer, visibly fighting back tears. Some clutched their instruments tighter, as though drawing strength from the melody. Even those backstage technicians and production crew members who usually remain focused on sound levels and camera angles admitted later that they had been overcome with emotion. For a few moments the technical work faded into the background, replaced by the undeniable presence of something greater. A key reason this performance struck such a chord was the message within the song itself. The lyrics spoke of brokenness, of wandering through valleys of despair, and of the hope that shines even in the darkest night. It was a song not just about faith, it was about survival through faith. Many interpreted the song as Joseph's personal cry. The way he sang certain phrases, lingering on particular words, suggested that these lyrics were more than poetry to him. They were lived experience. Every refrain of hope sounded like a declaration that he himself had clung to in his darkest moments. The chorus, powerful and uplifting, resonated as a reminder that no matter how heavy life's burdens become, there is always a source of strength that never fails. In an age where many gospel songs can sound repetitive, this one stood apart. It was not just music, it was ministry in its purest form. The theological depth of the song was also worth noting. Rather than focusing solely on triumph, it embraced the reality of pain in the process of healing. That honesty made it relatable. For those in the audience struggling with grief, depression, or family problems, the song gave words to emotions they had been unable to express. By the end of the final verse, people were not only listening, they were participating. The audience softly sang along, their voices blending with Joseph's, creating a chorus of faith and healing that filled the sanctuary. When the final note faded into silence, the sanctuary at Family Worship Center remained suspended in holy stillness. No one rushed to clap, no one hurried to speak. For a few precious moments, it was as if heaven itself had leaned down to listen. Joseph Larason, who had walked onto that stage carrying the weight of his soul, had left behind more than music. He had left behind a moment that would live on in the hearts of thousands. A night that changed everything. People often speak of performances as unforgettable, but rarely does a single song shift the atmosphere of an entire congregation and ripple across the globe through broadcast. Yet that is exactly what happened. On that night, Joseph did not simply sing, he testified. His trembling voice carried not just lyrics but truth. His tears reflected not just emotion, but an honest surrender that resonated with anyone who had ever felt broken yet hopeful. It is easy for television broadcasts to feel distant. A camera lens can create a barrier between the performer and the viewer, but Joseph shattered that barrier. Those watching from living rooms, hospital beds, or lonely apartments testified that they felt as though he was singing directly to them. For a few moments, geography did not matter. pain and healing met in one shared space. The spiritual echo. Every great gospel performance does more than move emotions. It stirs souls, and that is what Joseph's song accomplished. Calls flooded into SBN after the broadcast. Viewers testified that they had prayed for the first time in years, that they had felt God's presence return to their homes, that they had been reminded they were not alone. Pastors shared that church members referenced Joseph's performance in Sunday services. Families said they gathered together to re-watch it online, crying and praying as if they were there in person. For Joseph, this moment marked a turning point. He was no longer simply known as a gifted young singer on SBN. He was now a vessel of something deeper, a messenger of hope who carried with him an anointing that could not be explained by talent alone. His humility in the aftermath only magnified the moment. Rather than celebrating himself, Joseph pointed upward, crediting God for every note and every tear. Why it stands apart. SBN has broadcast countless performances over the years, many of them powerful and moving, but this one stands apart for a simple reason. It was raw and unfiltered. Joseph did not come to impress, he came to share his heart. That vulnerability is rare in a world where perfection is often prized over honesty. His cracked voice, his visible tears, and his trembling hands did not weaken the moment. They made it unforgettable. It also came at a time when many viewers desperately needed encouragement. The world outside the church walls is heavy with division, loss, and uncertainty. Into that chaos, Joseph sang a reminder that faith is still real, that hope still breathes, and that love never fails. A lasting legacy. Months and even years from now, people will not remember the technicalities of that night, the microphone settings, the lighting, or the camera angles. What they will remember is how they felt. They will remember the lump in their throat, the tears on their cheeks, the peace that seemed to settle over them as Joseph sang. They will remember that for one night, through one voice, God spoke directly to their pain. This performance has already been replayed countless times across social media, YouTube, and SBN archives. Every replay carries the same weight. New viewers who stumble across it are often caught off guard, suddenly pulled into the same emotional tide as those who first witnessed it live. That is the mark of a truly timeless moment. Why we will never forget. In the end, Joseph Larason's most emotional performance on SBN will be remembered not for its musical perfection, but for its authenticity. It was a reminder that gospel music is not about entertainment, it is about encounter. It was proof that one person's vulnerability can become another person's breakthrough. For Joseph, it was the night his ministry transcended song and entered legacy. For SBN, it was a broadcast that reminded the world why Christian music still matters. And for the audience, both in the sanctuary and across the globe, it was a night when heaven felt just a little closer. That is why we will never forget this performance. Not because Joseph Larason sang, but because through him, something eternal sang to us all.